Hello, and welcome to the final 905 episode of 2023. And as I guess is now traditional for us and traditional for just about every other news, current affairs program in the known universe, we're going to look back on the year that was and also look forward to the new year to come and kind of review what we looked at and make some poorly or perhaps excellently informed predictions for the year to come. And in the context of excellent predictions, I'm just going to read out a short quote that I believe was written by my colleague and partner here, Joel. It's our prediction, and I suspect actually probably more Joel's prediction, if I'm completely honest, for 2023. And here's the quote. So speaking of what's next, we look ahead to 2023 and what we predict will be the top story for the beginning of the year at least. Our suspicion is that Doug Fort's Greenbelt troubles are only starting, and this will prove to be an even larger scandal as more and more details become known. Well, there's 100% correct, and then there's 100% correct. I don't know, Joel, what kind of percentage of correct do you reckon that prediction was?
Well, I don't want to toot my horn that loudly, but yeah, I mean that came true. And credit where credit's due. I would love to say it was all us, but it was a hunch that paid off. But the real people who did the heavy lifting and the hard work and the journalistic bona fides were the fine people at the Narwhal who they had a great year-end article where they just summed the whole story this year up. But Emma McIntosh and Fatima Sayed at the Narwhal have done a fantastic job of just being a dog with a bone on this one and just not letting it go. And as well, the other side of that, we had on Tim Gray from Environmental Defense talk about their ongoing lawsuits to get this stuff to light, and they were the other kind of side of this project that just showed really just how, let's be honest, let's call it a spade, corrupt and incompetent this government came on the housing file. The idea that they were in bed with developers to open up large swaths of the Greenbelt, despite the fact that they promised all of us, not just in the 905, but across the province, they wouldn't touch it. They did. They not only touch it, they meddled around with it. They messed it up. They were, everything about it was just crooked and unseemly and just done wrong. Thankfully now, thanks to articles in the Narwhal and to the good people at Environmental Defense, the government has been forced to basically retract everything that they've done on the Greenbelt, because that's what happens when you get your hand caught in the cookie jar. They had no other game to play. There's no way you could save it. There's no way you could reimagine the policy or the process. It was just crooked from day one, and they got caught in it. I mean, this is a, dare I say it? I mean, this is like I don't like saying gate, but this is like a Watergate level of corruption. Like, this is just every new door you open, every piece of paper you found, it just showed more and more corruption or incompetence on the part of the government to basically give over the Greenbelt to I'm not saying all developers, a select few developers. That's even the greasier part of it, is that it's just entirely a backroom deal. So yeah, I mean, when I made that claim, did I suspect it was going to be this big? Not really. I thought it was just going to be a scandal that was just going to keep going for a few weeks. But the fact that it was as corrupt can be. I was a little surprised at that, I'll be honest. But man, oh man, like that, this is, I every time you look on it, I look and say, this has got to be the biggest corruption story, not in Ontario history. I'm going to put it up there as in Canadian history. Just the level of corruption that was unveiled here.
I think it's right up there in terms of good old-fashioned corruption as we understand corruption. You know, you can say there are bigger things that have happened in Canadian history that are outrages, that are more outrageous, and obviously you could talk about the treatment of the First Nations and things like that. But that's a different kind of wrongdoing, if you like. Um, it's not definitely not an excuse. Definitely not an excuse. But many of the people involved in, say, in what amounted to, in many ways, if not entirely, to a attempt at genocide, thought they were doing good. I mean, does that give them any get out of jail? No, it doesn't. But this is people knowingly acting to line the pockets of friends, uh, uh, just allies, whatever, in the most kind of venal and obvious way. I mean, it's not complicated. They can they can deny it, but I mean, it's like really, it's just right there for everybody to see. And I think, I mean, I haven't gone back and checked the actual what we actually said in the episode this time last year, but I suspect that if I could predict, I probably had a more jaundiced view of whether this scandal would kind of get um, traction. And the reason was that there'd been other scandals, as far as we're concerned, that had come and gone with remarkably little attention. It's like I don't see anybody being able to kind of get the traction in this story. It just seems that they can do what they like, and people are like, yeah, whatever,
Mhm.
it's fine. Um, um, but this one, for whatever reason, did catch the public imagination. I mean, partly it caught the public imagination because it's like old school. This is like old school corruption. It's like men in smoking cigars, and
Yeah.
it reeks of that kind of backroom
Yeah.
stuff. So it's easy to grasp in some ways.
This is old Tammany Hall corruption.
Yeah,
Uh,
and I
eh,
do think just the it shows once again what can happen when um decent journalism is done by somebody, and it's notable that it didn't come from the Globe or the Star. It came from the Narwhal, and also activists, good old-fashioned activists, really people who are not going to get rich or build huge reputations on the back of this, but just really believe in the cause. And again, we've spoken to environmental defense, and they've done incredible work, I think. Um, uh, uh, and insofar as the official opposition or the not so official opposition had much role to play in this, they were. I mean, I really feel they were Johnny come lately, and it really pissed me off actually when the NDP kind of when this all really hit the big time, that the NDP were kind of claiming credit, when the province reversed everything. It's like, yeah, well, thanks, we did this together. And it's like, I don't think we did do it together with you. I think
well,
other
that's
organizations did it together.
well that I mean this is you're right. I think this story is primarily this is a grassroots story. I mean, this is clearly the government did something. They did it secretly. They did it behind closed doors. It was done. They knew, and the reason why we know that they were doing it secretly and they were doing it wrong is that they reversed it. When you're caught doing something wrong and there's no justification for it. It's not even a matter of like, it, people don't like it, but we think it's right, so we're going to push ahead. You did it wrong. There's no defense of it. And the reason why we know that is that they reversed it. It's done. Like there's all the protections are back in place, and that's because they got caught. And how they get caught? It was because of grassroots. It was the people. This is what happens in a democracy: is you do not like what your government is doing, and you say, "I want answers." This was a failure on you're right, on mainstream media and kind of the opposition parties. The Narwhal, small independent journalism doing great work, grassroots environmental organizations wanting to get answers to questions that they have. Again, they were just a dog with a bone on this, and they did not let it go. And we've got the answers. And this is it's kind of that old school journalism uncovering corruption. That progressive era of of journalism that's going on here. And it's refreshing to see, and it emboldens me that the people are ticked off and they're angry, and there is something about kind of the elites are just out of touch. That it kind of, to me, it connects into that broader sense that I feel is happening to the people, is that the ones at the top have no idea what's going on at the bottom. They have no idea what the priorities are for those of us who are on the ground living our lives day to day, that the environment, climate change are important to us. We want to protect it, and we want a new way of doing things going forward. And instead, we have Queen's Park, both opposition and the government, kind of out of touch with what's happening on the ground. The Toronto Star and the Globe, and definitely the National Post Media, have no clue what to report. They have their own agendas that they're circulating through, and the rest of us are kind of out of touch with what they want. We just don't care. We have our own concerns. And quite frankly, I think our concerns are more valid, more important, and should be top priority for those in power. And that's why I kind of like this story a lot, is that it was the people kind of taking back that power and saying, no, this is not a priority for us. We're not going to sit back and just let it roll back and say, oh, those bozos at Toronto and Queen's Park just screwed it again. No, we're not taking anymore. A line's a line. You said you were not going to touch the Greenbelt. Put it back. You got caught. That's ultimately the crux of the story, I think, is why this is so happening. I suspect there's going to be more to it as we go on in the next few years. There's going to be ties back to this, but this is something that will hang around Doug Ford and his government's head for the rest of time.
I think so too. Yeah. I mean, I think, if you look back at the Liberal years, it always comes back. So you want to talk about why they ultimately lost, why ultimately they were kicked out. It always comes back to that gas plant story. The whether or not that was ultimately what forced them from power, that saw them people vote them out. That was the kind of mental turning point, even though it was almost, I don't know, it's getting on for a decade almost after the scandal. By the time they actually lost, that was kind of mentally people's like, okay, these guys are bums. Now, whether rightly or wrongly, and then I could talk all day about why a huge part of that story was unfair. And my bias is being that I was involved with that party at the time that was happening. But in the mind of the population, whether it's rightly, wrongly, or otherwise, that was the turning point. And I feel like even if Doug Ford wins the next election, this is still something that's going to be coming back. This is something that's going to dog them for the remainder of their time, however long that might be.
Why don't we move on?
It focuses people's ire. The people who already don't like them. It's like now it's like, why don't you like
this?
Them?
Is just you just can't kick this. You can't kick this free. And there'll be a reason. We're gonna come back to this thought later in the episode, folks, because we're gonna do a kind of a predictions for 2024, and this is going to be a theme that we're going to revisit. So stick around to the end of the episode, folks.
You looking to make the most out of this life and optimize your personal wellness? Then check out the Natural Man Podcast. Join me, host Mike C., as we explore all areas of human wellness, physical, mental, and emotional. Learn strategies to optimize your own well-being and be in the driver's seat of your own health. Remember, your doctor works for you. Learn biohacks, neurohacks, ways to improve sleep, and ways to optimize your body and your mind. Check us out on Apple, Spotify, the Fountain app, and at naturalmanpodcast.com.
But moving on, the other story that we thought was a top-notch story for the year, and that's the fact that the federal government finally getting off its behind and getting into the housing game. For a number, I can't remember how many times we've had on Mike Moffat to the podcast, but we had Mike Moffat on a couple times, Jennifer Keesmaat from on as well, to talk about, as well as Michelle Bielek for the Ontario Coalition End Poverty, and we were all talking about the housing crisis. How do we get more housing built to meet that demand that's there? And all three of them from very different backgrounds. One economics professor, one is in the development business, the third is a grassroots poverty activist. All three of them said, get the HST off of new rental builds. That's the biggest barrier to getting affordable rentals built in the country. And we've been just hearing that from all over, just very different parts of the zeitgeist, I guess. But to finally see the government get off its butt and say, okay, we're going to remove the HST off new rental bills. And they seem to be actually getting involved in this and actually putting the plans forward. It's refreshing to see. I think the fact that they only did it, quite honestly, is because Pierre Poilievre took that housing file and ran with it. It's his sort of now. I mean, I think we're starting to see that getting more towards the federal government now, and Pierre's a little bit less chipper on that front. But I mean, you give Pierre Poilievre credit where it's due. That man lit a fire underneath this government's butt to finally do something on the housing file. So, kudos to Pierre. There, I said it.
Yes, I guess that is the role of the opposition, right? That you pressurize the government, and in an ideal world, that pressure brings about good things. I guess I really struggle to give him any kind of credit, but yeah, I mean, I credit for the government for actually doing something that people were asking for, and again, it does show that when politicians listen to people, good things can happen, and hopefully the predictions that the HST could have a major effect on the more affordable end of the housing market will prove to be true. It won't happen overnight. That's the problem with all of this, and that if someone, as a result of that HST change, is like, oh, we'll consider building affordable housing, well, that process is now just starting in the very earliest days, and that will take 5 to 10 years to start feeding through into the actual housing market. So, the housing picture is a kind of oil tanker, that the metaphor we use for all kinds of other things, of an oil tanker sort of slamming on the brakes and trying to turn around. We've just slammed on the brakes, and we're going to have to wait a long time for that tanker to start turning. But that's just the story of housing, I guess. And really the tragedy is that so much time has been wasted, by the province, in its complete ineffectuality. We're just throwing away time, and the same goes for just the environment. The same goes for so many other things, that their incompetence and their venality, it's just throwing us years behind in all kinds of issues that we don't have time to waste dealing with. So yeah, that's frustrating. But in my criticism of the federal government would be that they've been so damn modest in their ambitions since 2015. So this is good. I mean, but could we have seen more? Yeah. I mean, really, housing is not it's not really their patch, right? And another theme that we've seen repeatedly, and I think we'll come on to this again later in the episode, is the province screws something up, so the feds come in to sort it out, which is great, I guess, but that's not how the country's supposed to work. And if all you're doing each time the province makes a screw up is uploading those costs and those responsibilities to the federal government, then we're kind of in trouble, particularly when good chance the next prime minister is a fucking stupid little shithead, most odious creep in Canadian history before he's even in government. God help us. Anyway, that's another story for another day.
That it is.
I don't like Mr. Polyev. I don't know if anybody's noticed.
Well, that's it. I mean, that's an episode for another episode. Because I don't know if anyone who actually likes him. They don't like Trudeau, but I've never heard of anyone say, "Yeah, I actually like Pierre." But that might be a whole episode for another for
And it could be that
2024.
we just don't mix in the right circles, Joel. You know, this is
Maybe,
the problem that
maybe.
like we don't hang out with the
No,
with the fuck Trudeau people. You
but
know, we hang
but it's
out
not
with
even
the fuck Polyev
hey,
people.
but it's not even that. It's I like to think I have a wide swath of people in my life that have a variety of different opinions and backgrounds and whatnot. I've never heard of anyone speak of Pierre as like, yeah, he is the solution we need. I am so excited. I like him. I want to hang out with him and I just want to be around him and I want to be, he's cool. Don't hear that. I hear people complain like the federal government's not doing enough. We need a change in that thing. And that's a legitimate concern beef to have. But I don't, yeah, I've never heard of anyone excited about Pierre who actually think he's a nice guy, that he's somebody that you're like, you know what? He's going to be he's a nice guy that's going to put me forward. I've never heard anyone say that. Now you're right. Maybe we're just in completely the wrong circles, but, I mean, but again, give him credit where it's credit's due. He's driven the Trudeau government to put a lot of eggs into the housing basket, and I'm curious to see what's going to what's going to happen next. Who knows? By the next time that the next federal election comes around, Pierre might be having to go to a different page in the playbook to bash Trudeau. So we'll see what happens. What's next on our plate?
Well, again, this is related to housing. I mean, everything's related to housing, and I guess it comes back to our theme on this podcast about the interrelatedness of all things. But it's the ideological stuff. A theme this year, coming out of the province, was the the attacks on trans students, the kind of dogma about that the teachers are trying to indoctrinate our children as if they haven't got better things to do with their time. And where did that come from? Doug Ford hasn't. One thing you can say about Doug Ford in his first sort of term and a half, he's not really an ideological guy. He's just, he's not about the dogma. He's about just running the country and being Doug Ford. That's where he is different from a Polyev or even a Harper. He's he's not a guy with a big brain who really gives, you don't get the sense he's a big religious guy or any of that stuff. But what happens when conservative politics fail, which they do, and when conservative governments are incompetent, it's like, well, okay, so the policies have failed. So what do we do now to get support? Well, let's attack some minority that everybody that we like wants to attack. So it's like go after trans students, go after teachers to an extent, go after go after people who can't actually defend themselves. And create an ideological war, create a sort of moral panic, and that's what we saw Doug Ford doing this year with with the increasing number of attacks on, what are teachers up to in our classrooms and all this kind of baloney. Which I can tell you what teachers are up to in their classrooms, and that's trying desperately to teach your stupid children how to fucking do the basics. Excuse the language I'm coming out with today, but it's early in the morning and I'm kind of, feeling a bit irritable. Yeah, I mean, that's of all the things we've seen this year, that annoys me even worse than the corruption of the Greenbelt. It's like going after people, the weakest in our society, the people who are least able to defend themselves, and basically feeding into an absolute lie the teachers want to force some agenda of, transsexuality
Right.
onto your children. I mean, it's just garbage. It's a fucking lie again
Well,
with the F bombs, but just screw you, Doug Ford.
well, yeah, I mean that's the we have had two. We did a few episodes on this matter. One we had on former Premier Kathleen Wynne to discuss the matter, which was insightful, but the need why we need to ensure that trans kids are protected and feel safe and secure, and able to use their pronouns as they wish in our schools. That was a very insightful episode, I thought. The other episode that I thought was, this is my time to toot my own horn, was just going to that million parent or million person march. That was not a million people, but basically protesting outside of school boards. To your claim of there's a conspiracy in our school boards and our teachers and the teachers unions to somehow force kids to become trans, which was ridiculous. But we had, I talked with both sides, and I did. It was just very much like there's a lie on one side. There's a lie of that this is happening. Now, where I think it gets dangerous is our government, and this is something we reflected on after the fact. Our government has not stepped up and said, this is not the case. There is no conspiracy in our school boards. Stephen Lecce, Minister of Education, should have been at the microphone since day one to say, this is not government policy. There is no conspiracy to convert any child into something that they are not. And that just doesn't happen. Like I looking back on that whole situation, I am shocked at how silent the Progressive Conservative Party was on this matter. I mean, the fact that Stephen Lecce kind of flirted with it. When Saskatchewan and New Brunswick introduced legislation of their own to force schools, teachers and administrators to out trans kids to their parents, despite that they may not wish it. The fact that Stephen Lecce was flirting with the idea and openly kind of this language matters. And you can say, well, he didn't actually do it. He didn't bring it. It's like, no, he doesn't have to, because there's a reason why. And again, my prediction for the next year ahead is what we're going to get into, and it comes back to this. But it to me, it was just screaming. It was telling. Why wasn't there an explicit denunciation? No, this is not government policy. This is not going on in our school boards. You have been misinformed. You have been lied to. It never came. It never happened.
To denounce it would be to contradict his own leader, in effect. You got Doug up there on the platform at whatever event it was. I can't remember what event it was now. Basically saying, yeah, there's all this crazy stuff going on with our teachers. As it's been put to me, teachers were just like, if they're trying to indoctrinate your children, just basic decent behavior would be what they all want, so they can get through their day.
We had the one episode, the follow-up episode to that person march, where we had on student Jaden from a high school here in Burlington in the 905, who identifies as trans. And to hear their perspective on what's going on in our schools, kind of actually on the ground, was for me, it was so enlightening. I mean, I've been out of high school for 20 years now. I'm 20, 30 years. I am removed from that situation. But to hear that, you and I have said this a million times on this podcast, the next generation astounds us. They are so much more informed. They are so much more compassionate. They are so much more energetic and mobilized. It gives me a lot of hope that the next generation is going to be a lot. They will do a lot of great things when they come to power in this province and in this country. I I'm convinced of it after speaking with so many of them. But yeah, it was just I guess this brings us into the prediction aspect of this episode, and that's kind of what we're suspect is we're gonna see happen in the not just the 905 but the province for over the next few years, and we're gonna tie it back into the Greenbelt. I suspect the housing file will continue to plague governments, mostly because it will turn into this provincial government will need to take action. Now, the plan that they wanted to put into play was the Greenbelt. They wanted to open that up, and they thought that would solve their woes. It turns out that's no longer on the table. What's going to happen now? I don't know, but I can't see a solution out of it without massive provincial money being invested into it in some way or another, either through tax credits or through direct building investments. Something's going to have to give. There's going to have to be some kind of action taken by the government. It can't just be, oh, I'm going to remove the red tape and that's going to be the problem. And that goes against Doug Ford and the conservative DNA. I can't see them doing it. It's just, it goes against what they want or what they believe fundamentally in their bones. So where does that leave the 905? Well, it leaves a lot of municipalities being shortchanged because of Bill 23, who are going to feel the pressure to meet the targets that they've all agreed to, but they're not going to have the money to pay for the needed infrastructure to accommodate those developments, not to accommodate the transit that's going to be needed for all the more people living in our cities. And they're going to come to the province to say, give us the money. Will the province fork it over? Who knows? But I predict that's going to be a massive fight between the municipalities and the province in 2024 and 2025 is my prediction, which is going to lead to a fact that at some point the province is going to say, I don't want to spend the money. I don't want to fork it over. We see that they don't want to fork it over for healthcare. They don't want to fork it over for education. And that's going to lead to things just not working out for us. And rather than deal with another Greenbelt scandal or whatnot, I think it'll come down to, it'd be easier for them to go to the trusted conservative playbook of, let's go pick on this group of people, namely trans kids. I think that they tiptoed around it in 2023 and they saw they could get away with it. I suspect we're going to see them going to that well or to that playbook and start using plays from there to divert attention away from other failures that they're going through, especially in the housing file, in the affordability file, as that becomes more and more prevalent for people in the coming years. When they are inactive on that file, it's going to be easier to say, let's shore up the base. And how do we do that? Let's go plant a seed that there's some conspiracy in our schools to turn your kids trans, or trans kids are getting extra accommodation over yours, or some other lie that's easy to sell to their base, and cause a disturbance that distracts the media and the rest of us from, I would argue, more lasting damage that could be done to this province.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree with those. Given your prediction last year, I'm certainly not gonna. I'm gonna go with whatever you say, Joel.
I'm not giving you Vegas odds here, but I'm just.
No, yeah, I mean, it's like as right-wing governments fail, if they're not already in the ideological camp, which increasingly that's their starting position, not their ending position. But in some ways, Doug Ford's government is more traditional conservative, and then it wasn't very ideological. Doug Ford is not a naturally ideological guy, but because his policies are failing in every way, the Greenbelt issue, that's the core of Doug Ford's government. If like each government, you can kind of pick a theme that is the premier's baby to an extent. If you look back in Dalton McGuinty, he would have talked about education. I think with Kathleen Wynne, you would have talked about transit. And with Doug Ford, it's housing. And it's at the core of that was, we're going to open up, we're going to get rid of all this red tape, just let people build. And that's going to fix everything. And it hasn't. It's utterly, utterly failed. And in the process, they got caught acting corruptly. So what's left now? What is Doug Ford's government if it isn't that? Well, then you get into the desperation stakes. Okay, how do we shore up our base? Well, let's just attack, the perceived enemies, the people who are not actually enemies. And these things don't create jobs, they don't help the economy, but the only benefit of these kind of stories is that they keep governments in power. So yeah, I would predict more of that. I would predict more of it anyway because it's very much Poilievre's playbook. It's really the only thing Poilievre's got going for him, as far as I can see. Is well, not going for him, but that's his. His politics is the politics of division. It's the politics of hate, of dishonesty, and dividing Canadian against Canadian in a way that I haven't seen in a country that I've lived in before. I've seen it in other countries, obviously the one to our south. But to see it sort of here on our doorsteps troubles me greatly. But yeah, Doug's going to go down that road because what else has he got? What else has he got?
I would say I just want to. I think we are correct in this, and I'm willing to stake my claim to it for 2024 and 2025. But I do want to put a big asterisk and a big caveat on that, and that is, it's not all doom and gloom. Because while I can picture our right-wing governments going down that road, I want to play that card. I was also very much emboldened by the fact that in our schools, we saw at faux and the various unions on the side of trans students. At those protests, we saw an equal number of activists, progressives coming out to defend trans rights. I am encouraged that we have two opposition parties, the NDP and the Ontario Liberals, three, and as well as the Green Party, who are very much in pro-trans rights. And I think we'll be catering on that support to fuel their movement into the next election. I think there's a number of organizations around the province who will keep pressure on at the grassroots level, keep the pressure on our government to stay on the straight and narrow. I think we see organizations like Environmental Defense who are going to keep the pressure on to say, no, focus on the issues that matter. Protecting the Greenbelt, sustainable development, building our cities in the 905 to be more friendly to us. So I don't think it's all necessarily doom and gloom. I think what I've seen in 2023 tells me that we have power. We have weight in this fight. We are not helpless to it. And if you're seeing dark times ahead, folks, there might be, but look to the person and people next to you, because we're all in this together, and we outnumber. And I do believe we outnumber anybody who is who'd rather work in the darkness rather than work towards the light.
There's a progressive majority in this country. There always has been, and I hope there always will be. The frustrating thing for me as I get increasingly grumpy and old is that progressive majority does not get itself organized to make sure that the minority politics of division and selfishness and greed and corruption is never allowed near government. There's a simple answer to this, and that's cooperation between progressive parties to make sure that somehow or other, even if you don't get everything that you want, we don't all get what none of us want, which is what our political system has delivered so often. So yeah, I mean, if I'm predicting for the next year, my prediction is a bit more gloomy. This is the gloomiest time in terms of hope that that I've had in my life, because it seems that every decision that is made is wrong. But you're right, we do have a massive majority. There's a story that no one's mentioned that really should be front page news. And there's the massive capitulation that the provincial government has just done with all the teachers' unions. There was talk all this year that industrial action was on the way, that we were going to have more strikes, because it was presumed it's like the government's going to go after the teachers. It's going to, and actually they completely bailed on the whole thing. The teachers' unions, teachers are getting back pay for income that they should have been earning over the last so many years. They've just got paid out for the money that Dalton McGuinty owed them, like recently, and now Doug Ford's going to be paying them for the money that he owes them. Doug, the strong leader, once again, is not a strong leader. I've always thought his government is very fragile. Someone, I can't remember who, it's annoying me, I can't remember who said it. The other day, someone was talking about, how Doug Ford is like the Teflon premier. I don't actually think he is. I mean, certainly the Greenbelt story has stuck to him hard. And he's always been very fragile when criticized. He will reverse at any moment. The minute he thinks he's getting unpopular, he's a weak leader. The problem is that the leaders of the other parties are weak too. And I guess at least they now all have leaders. And that's a question we have over the next year is whether that will make any difference, or whether it is actually down to not the opposition parties, but organizations like the unions, like environmental defense, like the Narwhal, like in our little way, us, to hold governments to account in a way that our political processes just don't seem to.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think on that note, let's wrap up 2023 with at least a Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, a Happy Hanukkah, if that's what you celebrate. And you know what? Just look out for each other. Just extend that helping hand to your neighbor whenever possible, and we'll all get through this together, because we have to.
Yeah.
So take care, everyone. We'll see you in the new year. Bye-bye.
Bye.
That's it for this episode of the 905er. Thank you for listening. As always, you can send us your feedback, thoughts, and concerns, or ideas for future episodes to our email, info@905er.ca. We'd love to hear from you. You can help us keep the 905er going by financially supporting us through Patreon as well as PayPal. Visit us at 905er.ca and click on the support tab. As well, links are in the show notes for your convenience. Lastly, you can find us on social media. Search for _905er on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So long for now. See you next time.